3, it has been directed that this meeting will be conducted in such a manner as to allow remote attendance by elected members. The meeting will also be live streamed. I'm going to pass you around the room so that we can have introductions from those members and officers who are here today. And just to let you know that we also have Provost Robert Bissett online.
I am Councillor Alf Kelly, Deputy Convener.
Morning, I'm Douglas Blythe, Legal Advisor to the committee.
Jim Miller, Committee Officer.
Kevin Brown, Planning Officer and Development Management, acting as Planning Advisor today.
Councillor Gordon Forrest, representing Lower Braes.
Bailey Kerr, part of the local review body.
Okay, thanks for that. That takes us to item 1 on your agenda, which is apologies, but everybody's here, so no apologies. Takes us to item 2 on your agenda, declarations of interest. And just for clarity, I'll read this out. Members should declare any financial and non-financial interest they have in any item of business at the meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. Have we any declarations of interest at this time? None. Thank you very much. That takes us to item 3 on your agenda, minute of meeting of the Planning and Review Committee held on the 21st of June 2024. It's pages 2 to 5 on your agenda papers. Have we any questions arising from this minute, or can we agree the minute?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay, thank you very much. That takes us to item 4 on your agenda, very important issue, which is the Planning Review Committee procedures. It's pages 6 to 10, and our legal advisor, Douglas Blythe, will take us through it. Thank you, Mr. Blythe.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, as you highlight, it's pages 6 to 10 on the agenda have the review committee procedures. I won't go through them line by line. I'll just try and summarise as best I can for the members and those observing online. This is a review of a local officer's delegated decision. It comes before members for a review. Members have to decide whether they have sufficient information to make a decision on the matter, and that could involve extra procedure, namely a site visit, a hearing, or further written procedures. As with every planning decision, it's to be made in accordance with the development plan, unless unless material considerations dictate otherwise. And it's an exercise, as usual, of balancing all the relevant policies and coming to a decision on those. The slightly unusual circumstances of this review are that it has been considered by the review committee before, going back a couple of years, and it was amended to grant decision, which has not been implemented for a variety of reasons, and it was felt appropriate, given that original decision hadn't been implemented, and in the interim MPF 4 had also come into operation. So effectively, the development plan that was in place at the time this was originally considered has changed. So it's appropriate for members to reconsider this application. It's already been before members insofar as a report was presented to the committee in May, outlining the background and inviting further written submissions from the applicant and the planning authority and interested parties, both on both on the terms of the previous decision and on the applicability or otherwise of any MPF 4 policies. And we have those written representations before members today. Members also undertook an unaccompanied site visit to refamiliarise themselves with the site, and that took place on the 12th of August, I believe. Excuse me. So it's really just a case of reconsidering the papers before you, and you know, the choices available to members are to endorse the previous decision, to amend it, or indeed to refuse the application. You know, it's a fresh start effectively. I think my colleague Mr Brown will go through the various policies and the background. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr Blythe. That takes us to item 5. It's the erection of a dwelling house on land to the east of Brayfoot Road, Bowness. It's pages 11 to 118 on your agenda papers, and Kevin Brown, our officer, will take us through the report. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Convener. As Douglas has already summarised, this application seeks planning permission in principle for the erection of a dwelling house on an area of open space on the southern edge of Bowness. The committee will see from the extensive background papers that the review committee were previously minded to grant planning permission in principle subject to the satisfactory conclusion of a planning obligation to secure developer contributions totalling £43,470 as compensation towards the loss of open space on the site. With the failure to conclude the required planning obligation and owing to the passage of time since the previous decision, the review committee on the 4th of May decided to invite further submissions in respect of NPF 4 to carry out a further site visit and to give consideration as to whether or not to accept an amended indicative plan from the applicants. The additional site visit was undertaken by committee on Monday the 12th of August, and today's agenda papers include submissions from the applicants and Place Services in respect of the up-to-date policy position, as well as comments on the proposed amended indicative plan. In terms of the content of today's papers, I draw your committee's attention to the Planning Authority's written submissions beginning on page 19. This response sets out the policies within National Planning Framework 4 which now apply to this application. I understand members have also got a copy of those in front of them today. This submission also summarises the position in respect of the updated supplementary planning guidance SGO 5 Green Infrastructure and New Development. Members will note from page 24 of today's papers that the updated guidance contains the same compensatory payment calculation figures for the loss of open space as were quoted in previous versions of this guidance and previous reports to the committee, with the required payment being calculated on the basis of £21 per square metres of lost open space. In terms of National Planning Framework 4 policies, members will see that the application is assessed as complying with the majority of these policies, with many issues capable of being addressed by way of suitably worded planning conditions. The policy assessment put forward by Place Services does, however, highlight a number of key issues, with the application assessed as being contrary to policies 14 design, quality and place and 20 blue and green infrastructure. Also, in terms of policy 4 natural places, Place Services highlight that policy 4 requires that potential impact on protected species must be considered prior to determination of any application. Place Services consider there to be scope on the site for protected species, and in the absence of any preliminary ecological survey, they consider the proposal to be contrary to planning policy 4. In addition to consideration of NPF 4, Place Services also comment on the proposed indicative plan put forward by the applicant, and which can be viewed on pages 17 and 18 of today's papers. Place Services highlight that the proposed footpath connections may not be achievable given land ownership and layout constraints, and that there is no guarantee that the council would be willing to take on ownership of the remaining open space areas as is proposed. Notwithstanding this, Place Services has calculated that should committee be minded to accept the amended plan, then the required compensatory payment would be reduced from £43,470 down to £30,660. In terms of the applicant's submissions, which can be found on pages 14 to 18 and 117 to 118, these acknowledge the need for compensatory payments and clarify that the applicant has no objection to making these payments. The applicant's submissions do, however, seek this alternative solution whereby the areas of open space shown on the proposed amended indicative plan would be gifted to Falkirk Council to remain as open space. The submissions go on to propose a series of biodiversity enhancement measures and to state that they feel that the proposal concurs with the aims and needs of National Planning Framework 4. Today's papers also include a note of consultation responses received since the application was last put before the review committee. These are available on pages 94 to 104 of today's papers. The responses received do not raise any issues which could not be addressed by planning conditions if necessary. And finally, pages 105 to 116 of today's papers contain copies of additional letters of representation received since the application was last before the review committee. These representations reflect a number of the points raised on previous representations to this application. However, additional concerns have now been received in respect of the proposed footpath links across the site, with it being highlighted that the proposed links to Charleston Avenue would require consent of third-party landowners. Concerns have also been expressed that these links would pose a risk to security and road safety. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much for that, Kevin. I'm going to open it up now to members in relation to this. Obviously, this has been a long time coming back before us. Obviously, everybody had major problems during the COVID situation. And I remember going out in sight about nearly 4 years ago when we went out there, and it came back to committee, and the members agreed to grant this application. I do see that it was contained within the report, and the responses coming back from the object. It's our understanding that Falkirk Council do not have the budget available to form these areas, because as Kevin said in his report, that they would be gifting 2 areas to the council. Could you maybe just give us a wee bit overview on that situation, Kevin, because I think that's important. If members were minded to grant, especially with a new condition in terms of the contributory factor. So what would be the situation then in terms of this two pieces of ground?
So the applicant's proposal, in essence, is to, as mentioned there, to gift the areas of open space to the council. It's unclear from the submissions made whether there has been any direct contact with the relevant people within the council in respect of these areas of open land. So it's open space. So it's not clear whether or not the council would be willing and or able to allow that to happen. I suppose that one of the other considerations to bear in mind here is even if the council were to take ownership of those areas of open space, there would remain question marks over how the footpath links would be achieved through those areas of open space and what the quality of that open space would end up being, whether or not there needed to be any improvements to that. That's not fleshed out in the submissions today. So ultimately, the review committee today have a consideration to make about whether or not you feel the proposal put forward is first of all competent, and second of all reasonable, I suppose, in terms of the council's wider aspirations for open space.
Hey, thanks for that. I'll just touch on it again, because obviously we've got a decision to make here, and that is a major decision in terms of what the applicant is offering in terms of these open spaces. So if we're a bit unclear about the determining of these, if we grant, then that's maybe go to Mr. Blythe on this one. You heard the question to Kevin. Kevin's explained it fine, but the fact is that we've got a decision to make today, and we're unsure that situation in relation to these pieces of open space. Then how then can we ensure that if we make a decision, then it's going to be carried out? Would it be terms and conditions or whatever? Thank you.
Thanks, Convener. Yes, as Kevin said, I think the applicant's submission was aspirational in some respects, and you would have to be careful that you weren't going to impose conditions that were incapable of being implemented, and that includes gifting or conveying land to a third party. I don't think the committee could oblige the council to take ownership of these areas of ground and maintain them. And given my knowledge of the appropriate departments looking at their budgets, I'm not sure whether they would necessarily welcome any additional areas to maintain. That's not to say that, I mean, it could be, the committee could determine that the areas remain as open space, albeit not, they would still be under the control of the applicant, and not necessarily formally conveyed to the council. That could be something that could be explored in due course. As to the condition of those 2 areas, that may be something that could be any landscaping or maintenance of those could, I think, be the subject of further investigation at a detailed application stage, or indeed could be conditioned.
Conditioned, yeah. Well, I think you can understand the problem we have at the moment, Mr. Blythe, in relation to the fact that we've got this information, but we're still unclear about these 2 areas of ground, which to me are quite significant. Other members like to come in at this stage? Councillor Forrest.
I see the quandary because every day we as councillors are getting requests from our constituents to have the council come along, cut that grass, keep it tidy, blah, blah, blah. And I fully go along with that. The other thing is that, you know, they might not be willing to do it, obviously. But the other thing is, I understand it, or the way I understand it is if the applicant doesn't take this land, right, and maintain it as open space, they will also have this part 13,000 less to pay by giving it to the council. Is that correct? The way I understood it.
Kevin? Yeah.
I'll kick off. Kevin will no doubt jump in. Yes, effectively, they're looking to narrow down the build area for the site. I think it's quite a restricted site anyway in terms of space, the former mine operations, etc. So I think there would be restrictions on how much could be built out in any event. But essentially, you're right, they're looking to keep those 2 areas as open space to reduce the overall contribution in terms of the supplementary guidance. Those areas, the whole area has a designation as open space at the moment. And my understanding is that those 2 areas, whether or not they were conveyed to the council or maintained by the council, would still remain as open space. Maybe Kevin could.
Yeah, I think as Douglas said, the applicants have put forward an option, as they put it, and the plans put forward at this stage are indicative in their nature due to it being a plan of permission and principle application. But you're right, the option that's been put forward does result in a reduction in the compensatory payment element, as you mentioned there. I think something to bear in mind for committee is that the red line boundary for the application site goes around the whole site. It would be open to committee to consider having these areas retained as open space by condition anyway, without there necessarily needing to be a transfer of that land to the ownership of the council. That in itself may allow for a reduction in the compensatory payment element. But I suppose there has to be an assessment made about the impact that has on the quality of that area of open space and whether or not that's reasonable in the round anyway.
That satisfies my questions on that. So basically, if I can summarise, and shoot me down if I'm wrong, basically the applicant then gives us back a bit of the land for open space that we can't use. They don't have to pay as much in obligations, and we've also got to, we as a council have also got to maintain that land. So basically we're 2-time or maybe 3-time losers from the application. That's the way I view it, but thank you.
That's one way to look at it, Councillor. I think I don't think there would be any obligation on the council to take over these areas of ground if they were left as open space. You know, that's another discussion, and I think that's a discussion that I think the applicant would like to have. I think probably the best end game would be leave these areas of open space and have somebody else maintain them. But if the council say no thanks, then effectively they remain as open space, but under somebody else's control and maintenance.
Thank you.
I suppose one thing to be careful of here is if members are minded to look at the reduction in compensatory payment figure, then I think that would perhaps need to be doubled up with a condition in respect of the layout of the site to ensure that those areas of land were retained as open space, as opposed to potentially then being built on further down the line at a later date.
Thank you. That's the main point. I maybe put it a little bit more than some people, but I'm afraid that's the way I am.
Time, because it's no simple, this one, and the length of time it's taken to eventually come back to us hasn't helped the matter. To be honest with you, I remember going out there, I think it was 2020 or 21, and after discussions, I think I had made it clear during the discussions before it was minded to grant that I was unhappy myself in relation to the amount of money that the council was looking for in compensatory payment. Going back there again after 3 or 4 years has not changed my mind one bit. I'm speaking independently here. The area to me would totally benefit for some sort of development on it, but to me then it's just trying to guide ourselves through the best situation for everybody, including the applicant, but also including for the residents who many of them weren't there the last time, and obviously one of them had come out and spoke to us. It is a difficult site, and I'm quite sure that all members that were there would realise this. And I think yourself, Councillor Forrest, you climbed the way up to the top of it to get the best advantage point of it. So I'm going back. I've got Bailey Kerr and Councillor Kelly to come in. Bailey Kerr.
Thank you very much, Convener. In Kevin's summary, we're saying we're reducing for 43,000 down to 30,000. And I've got it on page 15 where it gives you the percentage of the mass of areas lost, and it equates to £21 per. Is that common for that calculation to be given to every other site?
Yes, it's reasonably common. It comes from the document that's also in your papers here, the supplementary guidance note that I referred to, SGO 5. I'll get the correct page for it. It is of your documents, page 33. That document sets out the and there's a table on page 51 of that of your papers as well. If you can move to that one, that sets out the different types of open space which are lost and the associated compensatory payments that go along with those. And you can see that there's different values depending on the nature of the open space that's lost. So you can see there that refers to parks, gardens, amenity space, and that semi-natural open space is £21 per square metre. But you can also see there that things like tennis courts are £40,000 to, or bowling greens even more. So there's a different stage process depending on the nature of the open space that's to be lost, and that's where the calculation comes from. One thing to bear in mind is that the document that you referred to there on page 15, that's the applicant's submissions. That's their initial submissions to the review body after the request for written submissions. The councils, the police services submissions to the review committee highlight that the applicant's plan was set at the wrong scale. There seemed to be an issue in terms of the scaling that was marked on the plan. The applicant later on in their response to the council submissions acknowledges that scaling issue. So I think the figures that are mentioned there in the applicant's initial submissions, they differ from the council's the police services calculations of the open space requirements. And I think it's my reading of the situation is that the police services response is the most accurate of the two in terms of calculation of the compensatory payment.
Okay. I know every application is taken in their own merit, but did the new houses at the back there get charged £30,000 for every house the open space that they've lost in Bowness?
I don't know the exact contribution thresholds for that site. What I would say is that in terms of the open space elements, that that field that's been built on now was liable to have been agricultural land originally, not necessarily classed as public open space, whereas this site here was part of the wider developed site when Brayfoot Road and the other streets surrounding that was built out, but it was left over as additional land and classed as open space from there on. In terms of new development on the Greenfield site, they would be required to contribute towards open space requirements within the site themselves. So they will have either made financial contributions or put on site open space infrastructure in the development site itself. So that's how that is. It's a slightly different policy assessment when it's a new build site like that, as opposed to the loss of existing open space like we're considering here today.
Yeah, I'm just trying to calculate. I can't see them being. I take your word for it, Kevin. But if the 200 houses is built there and they all had to pay 30 grand each, that's £6 million. Wouldn't it be worth their while? Anyway, well, we had mentioned policy 4, species with relating to policy 4. Are we just making an assumption that there is species in there, or did you say we hadn't had a ecology report done?
I think that's the key. There's no documentation to suggest that it's been surveyed, and therefore there can't be confirmation given that there aren't any protected species on the site. The supplementary guidance in relation to biodiversity that the council produce has a series of, if you like, habitat types and described habitat types for scrubland and these sorts of things, and it sets out if you've got a certain type of habitat on a site, then there's a potential for X type of protected species to go there. So there is that potential here.
But really.
It depends on the nature of the site. I mean, if you have a tightly mown playing field, for instance, there's very little biodiversity value, and the nature of that habitat is slightly different to if you were to have wetland areas within a site, or trees, or even old buildings where there may be bats present in the old buildings. That kind of dictates the level of survey work which would normally be undertaken on a site. What you have here is as members seen from the site visit, is a site which is kind of established as amenity open space. It's overgrown in nature now. There's scrubland on it. There's long grasses. It bounds onto sort of the periphery of fields and so on and so forth. So there is the potential for protected species to be present on the site, but in the absence of the survey to go along with that, police services are suggesting that that's contrary to policy 4 of NPF 4.
But we haven't got any firmed up confirmation that there is, Kevin. That just somebody because of the land.
That's what policy 4 seeks, It essentially suggests that survey work should be undertaken before you come to a determination in order to establish whether or not there are any protected species present on the site. So that would be in the form of a basic ecological site walkover or that sort of thing, which would be able to carried out by an ecologist. They would be able to tell whether or not there were any protected species on the site. If there were no protected species on the site, then that has no direct implications for development of the site. If there were protected species, there has to be then mitigation measures considered, or is it appropriate to develop the site needs to be considered, and that's what NPF4 policy 4 tries to get at. It's trying to get at making sure that that assessment is made at the right point in the process, rather than planning permission being granted first and then consideration being given to biodiversity elements. So
Okay.
if members were minded to grant planning permission in principle, they could go down the route of a minded to grant recommendation, subject to the conclusion of an ecological site walkover or survey work to be carried out. And if that came back suggesting that there were no issues on the site, then work could proceed.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay.
I think all members were on the recent Millfield Drive application, and a very similar issue came up in that. If you recall that the policy 4 of NPF4 was discussed, and it was as Kevin's just described, a minded to grant subject to an ecological survey. And I think on that occasion it was then delegated to officers once that survey comes in to determine whether it's satisfactory or there's any other mitigation measures needed. So, I think that was a slightly different types of sites, but I think the principle is the same.
Okay. So is this a planning permission in principle application? Okay, because my next thing I had doing it was a policy about the design of the homes, but if it's only a planning permission in principle, how can we decide if that policy is right, or if it's not right, if we've not got the detail?
Yeah, so that policy that you refer to talks about the various elements of what constitutes a good site in that respect, and it talks about a site being pleasant and these sorts of things, and it's those elements which the police services report goes into and talks about their assessment being that the loss of the open space in its own right takes it into the realms of it being contrary to that policy, irrespective of what form of built development could then be achieved on the site. Because as you said, there is planning permission in principle, we don't have a design of the dwelling house or a scale to assess here. It's just the principle of, if you lost that area of open space, how would that fit with the design of the wider area and the character of that wider area?
I think and I don't know when the houses were built further on, the newer houses, I think when the committee decided the last time, it would be completely different. Obviously, it is completely different for this time, because they might have not had the houses at the side. So looking at it, it would be a completely different application, because I wasn't there the first time. However, and it was also mentioned about whether they could do any of these paths or open space because land ownership. And we had a very lengthy conversation at the last meeting to say it's irrelevant who owns the land when the application comes forward. When I first read the report, when I came in, when I received it, and I read the findings of the last review body, I could see some of the reasons why they were doing that. Road first, plan, permission and principle. What I couldn't get round was asking for £43,000 for one plot. I thought to myself, surely there must be gold in that ground or something. And I found it hard to, for one plot, 43,000. So that's where I'm very keen to listen to other members and the officers today regarding that. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, could I just maybe clarify a couple of points? We've got the Provost Bissett and Councillor Kelly still to come in, but could I just clarify some with, I think it's really important in terms of the financial contributions. It says that it's our understanding that Falkirk Council do not have the budget available to form these areas into meaningful space or install the proposed path links. So they're admitting right away that the council may not be happy to take these two areas on because of the financial situation. And then it talks about the, in simple terms, we have proposed to return some of the land to the public, which reduces the amount of lost open space to 1274 metre 2, by which the calculation methodology from the earlier committee report equates to 21 times 1274, making a revised contribution of 26,754. Now, then there's dubiety in relation to that, because if you look at page 19 and points of clarity, it states that it's also noted that the new plan submitted by the appellant is incorrectly scaled. The block plan appears to be 1/500 other than 1/200. So is that where the disparity arises in terms of the contributions then, Kevin?
I don't know if that's exactly where the applicants got the figures from, or whether or not it's another assumption that they've made. But what I would say is that the applicant's response to the council, to the police services submissions, it's the last document on page 117. In there, I can't recall exactly where it is, but they acknowledged that the plan was scaled incorrectly.
Right. See, the thing is, it's once they've said all that about the footpath links, a mutually agreed space. So, as a further offering, the applicant is willing to landscape the areas and form the new footpath links to a mutually agreed specification and move a further reduction to a contribution figure. And it says again, there has been no meaningful response from Falkirk Council. Now, this is because obviously we've been talking about this. The open space and the contributions are the important issue in this application. So we could then go back to the contribution has not changed and remains £21 per square metre loss, giving the same total as previously agreed by members of 43,470. However, if the two areas of green space are retained, this would reduce the contribution accordingly to 30,660. So that's based on 1460 metres 2 times 21. So there's the issue quite clearly is that we're saying that their calculations are based on incorrect figures. Is that right? According to this.
Yeah,
Yep.
they've acknowledged that it's paragraph 1.1 on their
Yep.
response on page 117. They said, to be fair, there was an error in the scale on the drawing.
Right, but what we're saying as well is that obviously, if members were minded to grant, they would obviously want to ensure that these areas remained as open space. So, in terms of what they're saying about gifting them to the council, would the council, could you come in on this, maybe Douglas? If they're saying that they would like to gift these two areas to the council, then on the other hand, they're saying that they believe that the council aren't financially feasible to take these on and maintain them. So what's the situation then? They say they're going to gift them, and we're saying, well, really, we don't want these open space areas because we can't afford to maintain them. So what's the situation here?
Well, the council can't be compelled to take these two areas on, regardless of whether the applicant deems it to be a gift. And we all like to receive gifts, but you know, I think with good reason the council might think twice about taking on an additional maintenance responsibility. If they weren't gifted to the council, they would remain in the ownership of the applicant, and there's, you know, if committee were minded, they could be continue to be designated as open space. That's not to say there couldn't be a discussion further down the line, but you know, at the point that a decision is made, I don't think the committee could compel any transfer of land. I think that would be out with their remit. You know, at the very least, the council could look to impose further conditions about any other landscaping to these areas, but the actual formal transfer of them would be another discussion.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to go to the Councillor Kelly and then to the Provost to see if they've got an input. Thank you, sir.
Aye. First of all, I think what Bailey Kerr says correct, that regarding an ecological survey, I think we need to get that done as a condition if we are minded to grant that. Can I ask, Kevin, are the paths there actually rights away, or the core paths, or what? I see one of the objections is that the path was by somebody's house and that, and they feel it's
They're just desire lines, essentially. They're well-established desire lines across the site. They're not core paths, albeit they connect into a wider network that eventually connects into core paths going north-south towards the golf club to the south of the site and that sort of thing. But they're not core paths as it stands. To be core paths, they perhaps have to meet higher standard than they are at the moment. But no, they're just established desire lines at present.
The applicant, I think he said he would, if he was to hold on to the land, he would actually improve the paths going through there. Am I right?
That's my reading of the documents, but it's a bit woolly, if I'm honest with you, in terms of how that would be achieved. As I said to you in my initial presentation, there is an issue that there's third-party land involved here. So the application site in itself, there are the areas of open space that are proposed to be set aside, where these paths would link through. You have those, but then beyond that, especially to the east of the site, there's a landscape strip between that and the new houses, and that landscape strip, my understanding, is owned by the third party. It's factored. That's certainly submissions. Some of the submissions and the representations that have been received for today's committee mention the fact that that land is factored, and in the words of the objectors, that they would never sell it, that sort of thing. So that there's an issue there. There's also the issue that it connects into that side. That desire line, as it is at the moment, connects into a parking court. It doesn't connect directly into a footpath itself. It connects into a monoblock car parking area. So there's a question mark about whether or not it's appropriate to formalise that link. In addition to the concerns of the residents on that side seem to be against the proposal to formalise any link through there.
Thanks, Kevin. I think the whole thing seems to be really, we don't have really any sharp information here in a way that there's so many things that if buts. So I don't know where we go from here. I'd like to hear the rest of the members' contributions and see what goes on.
Provost, would you like to come in?
Thanks, Convener. I didn't make the site visit, but I visited the site last week just to remind myself what it was like. Hardly seemed like 4 years who had been up there. And it is just a bit of wasteland, so any improvement, something needs to be done with the site, because it's just looks a total mess in a housing scheme. I'm quite happy with the amended application and trying to retain some green space. I think that's a quite a good solution. But see, regarding the if the council wouldn't take the land on, could the applicant or the developer say that they would be the factor in maintaining that land themselves? That's my first question.
I mean, that would essentially be a smaller version of the status quo as it stands at the moment. The applicant owns the site. There's limited maintenance, I suppose, going on the site at present, but so in the absence of planning conditions to tie down the nature of whether it be landscaping works or footpath works, whatever it may be that the committee were minded to ask for, in the absence of any conditions like that, the status quo would prevail, albeit on a smaller form. If that makes sense.
Right. I still think that figure seems awfully high for a plot like that. I remember down here we had the disability centre in Bainsford, and that got demolished, and there was the new development, and it became Perthshire Court. I think the planning game for that was something like maybe 38,000 or something. So it does seem. I agree with Billy Kerr. It does seem awfully high, but if that's the correct figure, but I suppose it is what it is. But so just where I am with this, I'm minded to grant an application and planning permission in principle, but we'd have to look at ecological survey and links to paths, and would the council we accept the gift of the green space, the open space. So that's where I am at the minute.
Hey, thanks, Provost. I would second you, Provost, on this one, but just like some clarity for Mr. Blythe in relation to the conditions attached. Obviously, as other members have spoken about the ecological survey. Provost, could I maybe come back to you in terms of the figure that's been quoted by the council then in terms of financial contributions? Would you accept that then within your motion?
I would accept it. I think it's quite a bit lower than it was before, and I think it's more like I would accept that, to be honest with you.
Okay. Councillor Forrest.
Thanks, convener. I'm all over this because while I agree with everyone saying it's a heck of a price for that site, it is a big site. And it's a bit like going into the restaurant and saying, I'd like a fillet steak, but I don't want the 2 end bits. Sorry, it's a good analogy, but
You eat fillet steak, it's the other steaks you wouldn't like.
Well, it's all good, isn't it? But as Bailey Kerr said, 200 times 30k for the bigger development would have amounted to about 6 million quid, and we didn't ask that. But the larger development, like all larger developments, you get other benefits from it. For example, they do put in open space. They do contribute towards NHS. They do contribute towards the local schools, which single house and very small developments do not. I'm disappointed that the applicant states that there's been no meaningful response from the Falkirk Council. That's very sad. I think we should be trying to do as much as possible. I would agree wholeheartedly that should we be minded to grant that the ecological survey takes place as soon as possible. And one thing that you brought up, convener, you didn't think it was a very big contribution the last time, 4 years ago, when you saw the original.
I thought it was too much.
You thought it was too much? Okay. got the wrong end of the stick. But at the end of the day, that was 4 years ago as well. When were the calculations made at £21 per metre?
I don't know exactly when they were made originally.
Yeah.
The supplementary guidance has been updated
It has been.
since this application was initially heard by the review committee,
Right.
back 4 years ago, to the point where we've now got reasonably up-to-date guidance now in front of us,
Right.
which contains the same figure. So that figure's been carried through.
It's just that everything else has went up in value over the last 4 years. Inflation's hit us all. So it's just those sort of things. But personally, I would be minded to grant with this as well, on condition that the conditions are met with an ecological survey.
In terms of finalising the notice of motion to ensure that we're because obviously it is a bit of a quandary. So the provost had moved the motion, seconded by myself, and what we want to do is just to firm up the reasoning behind that. Douglas.
Thank you, convener. My understanding of the motion before us is that the committee is minded to grant. That obviously there was an extant minded to grant decision, but the committee, having considered the fresh information and fresh policy assessment, is minded to grant the application, or reiterate that minded to grant application, subject to the provision of an ecological survey, and presuming that they would delegate to officers to interrogate that and impose any, appropriate conditions, and that the committee is also minded to grant on the basis of a contribution of £30,660 towards open space compensation.
Yep.
Now that would be secured by way of either a Section 75 agreement or some other legal agreement, and the details of that presumably would be delegated to officers to oversee, and thereafter, on completion of all those suspensive issues, it would be delegated to officers, police services, to issue permission subject to appropriate conditions. I don't know whether Kevin wants to, if there are any particular conditions that we want to draw out, certainly in terms of the 2 open space areas.
Yeah, I think you would be wanting to be careful and make sure that the open space areas were retained as open space,
Yeah.
first and foremost, by condition, and secondly that it's up to members, I suppose, to clarify whether they wish the open space to be improved in any way or left as is in some respects, or whether there'll be any planting, or whether or not you want the applicant to come forward with a series of proposals in terms of landscaping elements for perhaps for officers to consider under delegated powers.
Robert, I'll come back to you in terms of what the applicant had stated initially in his submission was that he would be looking to landscape the areas and form a new footpath links, but he was looking for a reduction to do this. But could we maybe use that as a condition, that would members be agreed to that he improves the Bailey Care?
Convener, I'm happy with what everybody's proposing. Personally, I still think 30,000's too much. But if that's what the rest of the committee's saying, well, I'm not going to go against it. But I still think it's a bit severe. However, if what you're saying, I'm uncomfortable with these paths, because I don't think the people in Charles Snedden Avenue, are wanting passed through to their side. They want to keep the place separated. But obviously it's something that we can't, well, I don't think we can decide today, because as Kevin's already alluded to, the ownership of the SIP, where the lady came and spoke to us when we were there, that's knowing the applicant's ownership, and it'd be very difficult for him to deliver that. And I didn't think the people in that Charles Snedden Avenue would even want that in there. So I didn't want to put pressure on us
Right.
as well as the applicant to say we agree to footpaths here.
Right.
The rest,
Okay.
the rest I'm fine with.
I'm understanding. Councillor Kelly.
I'm sorry, I lost the place on that. Wasn't it agreed that he would move the path to another part of the site?
There isn't a path.
The path that runs along the foot towards Charles Place Hills.
Charles Snedden.
The indicative plan which is submitted does seem to show an element of realignment of that
Mhm.
path. How accurate that is in terms of what they think would actually be achievable on the ground, I don't know. Because as I say, it's an indicative plan. I'm not sure what survey work that's based off of, for instance. I suppose from members' perspective, as Bailey Kerr's mentioned, if there are concerns about whether or not the paths are appropriate to be upgraded in any event, members may wish to consider whether it's appropriate to require any works to the path at all. That's why I was coming back to the status quo consideration there. You could, if members were minded to grant in this form, you could, in theory, be minded to grant planning permission with the open space areas being retained almost in their current form, perhaps with some additional landscaping, but with no footpath links, no formal footpath links through there. I think in reality, from experience of these things, the desire lines are likely to still be there in some form,
Yeah.
or they would re-establish in some form, even if there was landscaping works provided there. But it's for members
Right.
to consider.
Go back to Provost. And Provost, are you quite happy with that then?
But I'm convener, and but just like Bailey Kerr, that figure, the figure does seem pretty high. But if we can't change that, we're stuck with that. But it does seem quite high. And is there any way that figure could be reduced, or is that the figure?
So sorry.
Okay.
The figures based on an assessment of the proposal against the current state of the site against what it says in the supplementary guidance, and what it consists of, amenity, open space. It is open, I suppose, to members to consider whether or not they feel that it complies with that at all, or whether they think it's not of sufficient value in its current form to warrant taking a contribution. I suppose you could take that view. That would obviously be contrary to the Place Services view, and I think perhaps as importantly, contrary to the view taken 4 years ago when the application was considered initially. But that's something that's open to members to consider.
So could I just maybe refer to the letter for Hardy Associates, 16th of March 2020? It says, at no point in the application process was it intimated that any compensatory payment would be required for loss of amenity space. This factor literally just appeared during the review process. Then it goes on to say, this area of land is private ownership and has been for over 20 years and fenced off as such, although the fence appears to be broken down on a regular basis. This was the case when the open space audit was carried out, so the applicant is concerned as to why it was included as public open space. As this is only reason for refusal, it is imperative to investigate why Falkirk Council chose to include privately owned land in its open space provision, as this occurred anywhere else. So they were making that comment way back 4 years ago, that is it really classed as open space, given there was fencing around it and stuff like that.
You want to come back in, Karen?
Yeah, I mean the differentiation between public and private ownership, public and private open space, is essentially that. It's just it's an ownership consideration. I mean, there are areas, quite extensive areas in the Falkirk district that are under private ownership, which are classed as open space. And I mean, not far from here, the old Jupiter project, for instance, private ownership, but it's open to the public to use, and it's classed as a valuable open space area and these sorts of things. So that's a quirk, I suppose, in terms of the terminology that's used, but it is possible to have, and there are extensive areas of the district which are in private ownership, which are open space in terms of auditability and in terms of the value of that space to the wider community, or whether it be a visual impact value, whether it be a recreational value, you know, these sorts of things. So there has to be a sort of site-by-site assessment made of the quality of that open space and the value of that open space.
Provost, I'll come back to you. You're the original mover of the motion. I was the seconder. After the discussions, you want to make any changes to your original motion?
I would like to, if possible, I would like to see that fee waived, if it could be removed even.
Okay, we'll go back to just double check that. Would you just hold on a minute, Provost? So what you're saying is I'm minded to grant, subject to conditions that you've always mentioned already about the ecological survey, etc., and that these areas remain as open space, but you want to withdraw the contribution side?
I would like that, or see it significantly reduced.
Yeah, well, we'll get that checked.
Okay, so the policy considerations for members are predominantly the policy 20 and NPF4 blue-green infrastructure, and policy P16 protection of open space within the local development plan 2. In addition, the supplementary guidance that we've been referring to today as well, and the supplementary guidance in itself takes its lead from the local development plan. And it states that where a development involves the loss of an area of open space which will have a significant adverse impact on the overall recreational provision, this will only be allowed where the loss is compensated by qualitative improvements to other open space in the local area. That's essentially what we're talking about here, is the compensatory payment element. So I suppose it's open to members to consider whether or not they take the view that there is no significant adverse impact in this instance, if that's the direction of travel, and that would be the hook, I suppose, to waive open space compensation payments.
Thanks for that, Kevin. Provost, you've heard what our planning officer has stated. So I'm coming back to you, the mover of the original motion. Is there any changes you would like in your original motion for members?
Well, I don't think there is a significant impact on loss of open space. Personally, I think it's just been a bit of wasteland for many, many years. So I'd be willing to support waiving the fee based on that it's not a significant impact.
But what we're saying as well is that the two areas would still remain as open space.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, then, sorry, Councillor Skelly.
If we left it in his ownership, but wanted it landscaped, which would be a better looking than what's there, then we could reduce that payment. Is that correct? That 30,000 could be reduced if he was allowed to landscape it and change the path.
I'm not sure I'm quite following that. So the compensatory payment, as I say, if members are of mind that the area has significant value to warrant the compensatory payment element, then that is based on the square meterage of the site.
Yeah.
And as we've talked about this morning, the calculation, if you include these areas of open space that's proposed to be set aside in the amended indicative plan, is that contribution is then therefore reduced down to in the region of £30,000 as opposed to that initial figure. Are you suggesting that it would be reduced even further beyond that?
Yeah.
On the basis that,
Didn't he ask for that somewhere in it? Sorry, I've lost the place in that, where it was.
Yeah, if
That he suggested that he would take, if we reduced it, he would keep the land, but landscape it.
yeah, I think that's where you've got to be careful about making sure you're aware and know exactly what you want from those areas of open space. I suppose there is an argument to say that if the applicant is making some sort of improvement to those areas of open space, then potentially you could say that you could make a judgment about that value of the compensatory payment. What I would say there is that capable on the site? Is it possible to do that? And what value are you placing on these improvement works? As we've talked about the footpath links themselves, whether or not they are A, appropriate, or B, what quality they would be if they were improved, what degree of landscaping works would be carried out. The areas aren't that large in terms of their overall size, so I would question what improvement works could be made to that land meaningfully that would allow a reduction in the figure, if you like. So I suppose there's an assessment really, and that would have to be led by the applicant, I think, in terms of what they were proposing to do and what those costs were. So I think there's potentially additional procedures there if that was the direction of travel.
Again, as I said, it's very complicated. The whole review of this is complicated. So if we left it as it was with 30,000, when it came to a detailed planning stage, could we then reduce that? Should he put in a reasonable change of landscaping? I mean, at the next stage.
I think provided it was built into the legal agreement, a planning obligation at this stage, that the ability to be able to amend that figure depending on improvement works to these other areas of open space, and provided it was nailed down in the planning obligation to this application, then I suppose you have the potential that when more detailed proposals come forward, then you could allow for that to happen. I think if you didn't tie it down in the legal agreement at this stage, the mechanism isn't there in terms of the reserve matters application, or matter specified in conditions application, rather, to allow you to do that. So you'd have to tie it down now.
Okay. Sorry, Douglas, is there a way we can do that?
No,
yeah, excuse me. I think we just need to sort of take a pause and see what motions are actually at large, because we started out with a motion from the provost that was seconded, and that was looking at the contribution with these two additional areas being left as open space. Understanding is that the provost has moved to a position where he feels that no contribution is applicable, and that applies to the whole site, as far as I understand it. But that the two areas would still remain open. I don't think we'll have a seconder for that amended motion as yet. But I think what you're saying, Councillor Kelly, is that you're potentially looking at an alternative amendment where the original contribution is reduced. I think I think if you would have to consider whether you take the view that the area is of significant amenity value in terms of the policy, and whether a contribution is therefore applicable and what contribution that would be. And the only figures that we have to go on are either the 43,000 for the whole site, the reduced figure of 30,660 for the restricted site with the 2 additional areas. And if you were to go down that route, I think, as Kevin had said, you could build in some mechanism whereby that could be revisited at a later stage. But it would be, the devil would be in the detail of that, and it's very difficult to say how easy that would be at this stage.
Okay, thank you for that, Douglas. Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Just go back, just to clarify exactly where we are. Obviously, we've had a lengthy debate on this because it's been quite complex, and the fact is that it's 4-year-old hasn't made it any clearer. There's been a good debate on it, and we're delighted with the officers came forward with this information to allow us at last to make some sort of decision. Going back to the Provost has now came forward with a new motion, and the new motion states minded to grant, and ensuring that the 2 areas of open space are retained. It doesn't believe that there's a significant impact, and it would like to withdraw the contributions. Am I right in saying this, Provost?
Yeah, that's correct, Convener.
So I'm after all the deliberations, I'm happy to second this motion from the Provost. Thank you.
Sorry, could I just clarify that does include a minded to grant in terms of the ecological
Survey?
Yes.
And that. Yep.
Convener.
Okay, Councillor Forrest.
Thanks. I was going to be asking the same question as Councillor Kelly regarding the payments. I'm not happy about reducing them to 0. To be perfectly honest, because unless we have real conditions on that ground, there is a possibility that the applicant can come back at a later date with another application for another house, etc. So we would have to, and thereby the paths would be gone. As Kevin stated, that these are desired paths. We have no knowledge about how long those paths have been there, why they're there, but we know that they emanate from Charles Snedden Way, Crescent
Avenue.
Avenue, third time lucky. And head off to the entrance of this site. They're desire paths. That means that people use them because they want to go from A to B, and they could have been in use for we don't know how long. I'm glad about the ecological survey, I really am, because when I was up, what I should have said earlier, you referred to me doing my Sherpa tensing going up to the top of the site. There were deer tracks there. Now, deer aren't a protected species, but they usually show that there are other species there. So, but I'm against a total reduction of fees. I think there's got to be something. I think that it is a significant area. It's a large piece of land, but we need something there.
So you're going to formally, you're still going to formally move an amendment to the motion that's been put forward?
Can I ask Douglas?
Yeah.
Can we put that in as a condition that if the applicant comes forward with a plan for that area, we will look at reducing with figures. We will look at reducing in the planning stage these the developers' contributions.
This would be an amendment to Councillor Kelly to the original motion. You maybe want to help him there.
My understanding is this is an amendment against
Yep.
the original motion.
Yep.
So we're just trying to clarify. We have the motion from
The Provost,
Provost,
seconded by myself.
seconded by yourself, which involves minded to grant for the ecological survey,
Areas retained,
areas retained.
and then because they don't believe that there's any significant impact, then the contribution
contribution.
would drop.
I think any amendment about I think we have to clarify what figures we're talking about here, Councillor Kelly, because the original calculation was based on the entire site, and that was the 21 square metres, sorry, £21 per square metre, which came out to the sum of £43,000. Now that was based on the guidance, and that's what the committee originally decided. The alternative proposal reduces that figure to £30,660, but that's based on 2 areas being left as open space. So I'm just trying to clarify what further reduction from that figure you're looking at, because I think if there were some conditions about some sort of landscaping on the 2 areas of open space, they would almost be in lieu of a contribution towards those areas. So I'm struggling to see how the 30,000 figure could be reduced any further, to be quite honest. I'm not sure whether Kevin can come in with any assistance there.
Yeah, I mean, the compensatory payment, the guidance surrounding the compensatory payment element would essentially mean that compensatory payment could be used towards the improvement of open space in the surrounding area, if you like, of the application site. So that's open to the council to spend that money how they see fit, once it's received, provided it's for open space improvements. I think what you're getting at here is that you want to see that figure coming down on the basis that the applicant, in addition to leaving these areas set aside, there would be some other qualitative improvements to those areas.
Yeah, as he suggested.
Yeah. And we've got to be careful that there's not a double counting element going on here in terms of the compensation elements. But I think in theory, you could have a payment going towards improvements in the wider area, as well as improvements by the applicant immediately adjacent. I think that would be reasonable in terms of the tests for contributions and so on, in terms of the circular and things. I think that would be reasonable enough. It's located immediately adjacent to the site, that sort of thing, or on the site. So I think, in my mind, that works from a mechanism perspective. The question mark in my head is over what qualitative improvements you could actually achieve on that site, particularly if members aren't of mind to improve or formalise the footpath link that runs through there. Just looking at the layout plan, if you take out the footpath elements themselves, there's not an awful lot more space there. And I suppose the question is, what would you be expecting to see done there in terms of quality improvements, and how would that affect the figure that we ultimately are asking for at the end of the day?
I can see the difficulty in the fact that it's very difficult to be able to assess what's got to be done to it until we come to a planning stage and see what's happening. That's why I thought we could perhaps leave it as it is and then go to, when it comes to the detailed planning, that we could insist in, or when he comes up with his plan, how he would develop that piece of ground, piece of open space. And then do it. If we have to put it in now, it's almost impossible to determine that without spending another couple of hours deciding what we want to see in that area.
Could consider whether or not they feel the need for any improvements to those areas of open space. If the applicant were just to leave them aside, if you like, and leave them as is that something that the members feel is appropriate, or do you feel that there needs to be some form of qualitative improvements? And if that's the case, I think we would perhaps be looking at asking for a condition or something along there for a package of improvement measures costed to be put to the council at the planning service to assess and to essentially go through the costs associated with that, the costs associated with additional planting works or landscaping improvements, whatever it may be, and make the calculation there. Is that appropriate for those figures to be deducted therefore from the 30,660 figure? But you could only do that if you have an itemised list of what those works were, and that's where I come back to. In that small area that's left over, what works are we going to be getting from that? The art improvement works, or is it better just to leave as is? That's in my mind, that's the decision I suppose you've got to consider.
I think that's a very valid point you said there. No taking away from Councillor Kelly, but the fact is, this isn't. We're not talking about a field here. We're talking about a really small condensed area, and the fact of the matter is that people that maybe talk about footpath, it's just somebody coming because, as Bailey Kerr stated at the beginning, when we went down there all the years ago, there was no houses there, and people were only using it as like a wee path that many people use in different areas. It's anyway. So we'll have a situation just now. We've got a motion moved and seconded with the details contained in it. Councillor Kelly, are you formalising an amendment here? Because
Yes,
yeah,
that could be worded.
yeah.
I think Kevin had suggested some. I mean, you could have a situation where you reduce the contribution in terms of the whole area on the basis that 2 areas are being left as open space. That there is some conditionality about assessing the potential improvements for those areas and a costing schedule, and if appropriate, that could go towards reducing the overall sum that's been assessed. As Kevin said, I think once you got into the detail of that, it would be effectively you're looking at £43,000 for the whole site. The reduced area is £30,000, which leaves £13,000 of potential improvements for those 2 areas. Now, whether they're big enough or lend themselves to that level of expenditure, we just wouldn't be able to get to that stage until much further down the line. I mean, we could attempt to in any section 75 to secure the £30,000. Look at some wording around reducing that £30,000 if they were able to demonstrate that they'd exceeded the expenditure on those 2 other areas. But it's very difficult on the spot to think how that would play out in practice, and you run the risk of making the conditions unenforceable, or any conditions within the section 75 unenforceable or unreasonable.
It's really we can do anything. That's there's been a
See,
or against.
yeah, the fact of the matter is, going back to it and talking about when I went down there in the first instance, and I was really uncomfortable with the amount of money that was being asked for all the years ago. The fact is that when we went down there again, the site has deteriorated somewhat in terms of the condition of it. But the fact is that the what you would call these footpaths, I would say that I don't know how well they're used, but the fact is it tells you quite clearly that these 2 areas would be retained. They would be retained, and whether any money or what's spent would be retained. And to me, that's the most important thing. Bailey Kerr, you've been trying to get in.
I have, and it's pertinent to what the latter stage of it we were talking about there, especially you there, convener. If you go to page 17 or page 18, it shows you the indicative areas that will be retained. has been highlighted by lots of members of the committee, there are no massive areas. And if we take our own policy regarding areas where we have, there's some constituents saying these are just no cutting that grass, where we're saying it's biodiversity. So these could be left as a biodiversity natural area for any species that are there, just because of the size of it. If we're asking them to then landscape them, but maybe taking away the benefit of the natural surrounding for any species that is there. I think it's the same. I think Councillor Kelly's got it right. You either for it or you're against what's proposed there. Because try to get down to a level where if they do things that will reduce it, if we didn't, it stays. I just think the natural areas that they're saying that they're going to leave, I'd be quite happy with them being natural than landscaping them.
Just sorry,
Can I
Councillor
just-
Kelly.
just on that point, I mean, if you're going to say that leave these areas wild, then why not leave the whole site wild? You know, why would you say that? You know, the provost was saying, "Oh, it's actually a wild area. It might be grass, birds feeding grass and that." So I don't think that argument stands on that. You leave the other bits wild, but you're going to build on top of this one. Yeah.
Councillor Kelly, can I tell you this? I'm looking at you and listening to your sentiments. That's the good thing about the planning committee or a local review body. We're all different. There's 5 of us on this committee. Everybody could have a different interpretation of policies or whatever. The issue now is that we've had a motion moved and seconded with no amendment, unless I'll give you one more opportunity, either yourself or Councillor Forrest, because I've been listening to you, that you're no really supporting what's coming forward. But before we can go into any debate, there has to be an amendment to the original motion. Are you putting forward an amendment?
Oh, that's all right. Due to the complicated way it would have to go through this, we would have to be here for another couple of hours to work out, you know, what we need to put into an amendment. So no, I'm not going to put an amendment.
Councillor Forrest, so you got an amendment to put forward?
I'm not moving an amendment, but I still think that it is wrong to say that it is not got a significant use. The proof is that the applicants want to build a house there. That shows that it's significant. The pathways are a significant aspect for the users of the path. And then, as I said, the ecology side as well. I don't see how we can do this to a point where we can all be unanimous with it. Because I can't visage any form of words where we could put this into being, but at the same time, I'm not for reducing the cost to zero.
Okay, thank you. Just ask a question at this stage to Mr. Blythe. Mr. Blythe, obviously, we've got a motion moved and seconded, and there is no amendment. But is it possible to include in the minutes the feelings of both Councillor Kelly and Councillor Forrest?
Absolutely, convener. The dissent of both members can be noted. Thank you.
Okay, then you just want to
Yeah. Actually, Jim has just pointed out that there would need to be an amendment that wasn't seconded, that fell, in order for dissent to be formally recorded. But we can reflect the views of members in the minute.
in the minute. Okay, Okay then, could I say this, that this has been maybe a bit messy, but the fact is that it has been a good debate. Everybody's had an opportunity, and we thank the officers for continually coming in and keeping us right. But other than that, we'd just like to thank you all very much, and thank you, Provost, for being online, and have a safe journey home.
Thanks, Convener.